Hello and welcome everyone to the Words webinar series, a new initiative that we have recently launched here at the festival. I'm Josh Lambier, the director of the Words Festival and host of our new series, which we are calling Public Matters, and I'm coming to you live from London, Ontario, here in the Words studio. It's my privilege to have the opportunity to host tonight's guest, acclaimed essayist, journalist, and cartoonist Gabrielle Drolet, who is joining us tonight to talk about her newly released book, out just this week. And here is the gorgeous cover of the book, Look Ma, No Hands, a debut memoir about chronic pain, accessibility, and young adulthood. At Words, we are very proud to say that this is Gabrielle's third visit to the festival. In 2019, her first visit, she joined us to talk about her work as the student writer in residence at Western University, where she completed her degree in English and Writing Studies. And then she joined us again in 2020, a year after she graduated in high pandemical times, to speak to aspiring writers about her pursuit of a career in writing. Now, Gabrielle joins us 5 years later to launch her debut book. So I regard tonight's event as a triumphant celebratory homecoming, a virtual homecoming, to talk about this book with us. It's all very exciting for us here at the Words Festival. I'd also like to acknowledge tonight's partner for the event, London artist and cartoonist Diana Tamblyn, creator of London's Ting Comic and Graphic Arts Festival, who made tonight's event possible with her extraordinary organizational energy and generous support. We appreciate everything that you do for the London arts community, Diana. In February of 2021, mid-pandemic, Gabrielle developed a chronic nerve condition that spread pain throughout her upper body and left her unable to use her hands. It only worsened over time, and as a writer and artist, she had to learn new ways of creating and expressing herself. The experience completely changed her life and her outlook. Gabrielle's debut memoir, It's Funny, It's Moving, reminds us, all of us, that one of the distinguishing features of disability, as it constitutes an historically marginalized group in our public life, is that it is one in which members of the majority can join the minority at any time. It is indeed an unsurpassable human condition that Gabrielle faced early in her adult life at the age of 23. Gabrielle is a regular contributor to The New Yorker, and she contributes cartoons to the Globe and Mail. In fact, she was recently named a finalist for a national newspaper award in the editorial cartooning category, the first woman to be nominated in the category in 76 years. Her written work has been published in the New York Times, the Globe and Mail, the Walrus, Vice, Teen Vogue, many more, all the major ones. Her essays on disability have been nominated for a Digital Publishing Award and won gold at the Canadian Online Publishing Awards. Gabrielle holds an MFA from the University of Guelph, and as I mentioned previously, she is a graduate of English and Writing Studies at Western University. Welcome back to the Words Festival, Gabrielle Drolet. Amazing. Bitches.
It's
Very
so
good.
good to be here and to see all of the familiar London names in the chat. Like
So
Madeline
good.
Bassnett, who is in my acknowledgements. She's in the book in her own little way. Yeah, I feel so lucky to be here. It's been a while. It's been 5 years.
It has been 5. As I say, it feels like yesterday that you were with us, and yet in between that time, we've gone through a pandemic, and as we're going to see, you've gone through quite a few things in your life. Because we're doing the event here virtually, of course, but from London, Ontario as a host, I can't help but start off by taking you back to the good old days of your time at Western and at the Gazette, which for those of you joining us across the country who don't know this, the Gazette, it's been a publication since about 1906 and boasts some impressive alumni in Canadian media and journalism, including, just give you a few names here, Cameron Bailey at TIFF, Stephen Brunt, Carol Off, Kevin Donovan, Scott Feschuk, Elliot Friedman for people watching the hockey playoffs right now, and of course, Gabrielle Drolet. As a freelancer in journalism, I wonder if you could talk to start us off about how your time at the Gazette helped prepare you for what you're doing now, but also just what was the experience like being at the Gazette?
Oh, it was fundamental. I mean, it was awesome. I was there for 3 years, so my whole time at Western. And I had never really thought about doing journalism really at all or as a career before that. And I transferred to Western from another school and didn't really know
Oh,
anyone. I missed out on all of those first year university opportunities most people have. I didn't do Frosh
right,
Week, I didn't do that. So I was like, well, I'm an English student. I guess I joined the student paper. And it ended up really changing my life in a way that I think is hard to overemphasize. Because I never went to journalism school afterwards. I never actually formally studied journalism. Which is the case for a lot of Canadian journalists.
right.
We're really lucky to have an amazing institution of student newspapers that can really serve as a training ground. So I loved the Gazette. I think back on it fondly. And yeah, I think without it, I probably wouldn't have become a freelance journalist at all.
Right. And I think when you were in your time at the Gazette, you were both the opinions and the culture editor. Am I correct about that?
Yes, yeah. I did culture first and then opinions, where I did have a lot of I had a
You
lot
did
of
have a lot of
opinions.
opinions.
Yeah. Um, which was interesting. They were such different roles where, culture was like, oh, here's what's happening on campus, whatever. And opinions were people sending me their hottest takes.
Right.
And I learned a lot about the thoughts of the student body. It was a really interesting job to have.
Yeah, and for somebody who's doing freelance work, I imagine you learned how to pitch. I imagine you learned how the fundamental skills that are part of your everyday life now.
Yeah, absolutely. And even just learning, because as you mentioned, the Gazette has such a wide range of alumni across the country who are now, at the CBC and the Globe and Mail and kind of everywhere.
Hmm.
It was really lucky, I think, for me as a freelancer. So much of my success or so much of my work has come from being able to reach out to people and just ask for help and saying, hey, you used to work at my student newspaper, now you do this. How did you do that? Even with the book, there was a lot of that. That's a through line of my career, is just asking people when I don't know what I'm doing. And yeah, the Gazette had like a built-in network that let me do that. And also, I would have never known how to pitch or what a pitch even was if I hadn't
Right.
been there. So yeah, it was really foundational, 100%.
When we were advertising this event, a certain Dan Brown made a remark, and I think Dan Brown on his Twitter profile has something like mentor in chief as his descriptor, but I think it's something
Nice.
like the managing editorial support manager at the Gazette. But he had very high praise, so you can tell there's lots of love still at the Gazette for
That's
you and your work.
so sweet. I had recently, if you want to read more about the book, the Gazette wrote an incredible little profile on me. And I think that was like the most exciting press thing that's happened for me. I'm very lucky to have, a publicist who's working on the book and she's doing her thing.
Yeah.
But the Gazette reaching out to me, I was like, this is so, and I'm being genuine. It was such a full circle moment.
Yeah.
And it just felt so special because I remembered being in that newsroom and doing the same thing, being like, you used to be at Western and now you're
Yeah.
doing something. Can I talk to you? Yeah, that was very, very cool. And the journalists there are just amazing. I'm so in awe of student journalists. So that's my
So good.
favorite thing that's been written about the book is in the Gazette.
That's so good. That's heartwarming to hear. In my opening remarks, I also mentioned that you recently were nominated for a National Newspaper Award for editorial cartooning, the first woman ever to be nominated for that award. Amazing. Also bonkers.
Yeah.
But a first. One of the first published cartoons, if not your first published cartoon, was also inspired by your time at Western. Let's see if I can bring this up here. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about this.
Yeah, that was in the New Yorker, which I had been pitching to them for years. Kind of in fourth year, as I was doing the thing of being like, I'm studying creative writing. I don't know what I'm going to do when I graduate. I don't know. For some reason in my head, I was like, oh, I can expand my horizons with cartoons. That'll be stable employment. And so I started just doing sketches and sending them to the cartoons editor at the New Yorker. And after about a year of, trying everything, I sold this one. Actually, I sold this one. I mention it in the book because it was just a few weeks before my chronic pain started. So it was an interesting thing of being like, I sold my first cartoon to the New Yorker, and then I couldn't draw anymore.
Wow.
But it was very inspired by Western because I love birds, and Western famously has a bit of a, I don't know if I'd call it a goose problem, a goose population.
They do.
Western has
Yeah.
geese that hang out there. So yeah, it was really heavily inspired by. There's
Yeah.
one specific picture of a guy at Western, and he's walking past a sign that says "Beware of geese," and he's
Those
getting
are up right
attacked by
now.
a goose
Yeah.
in the
Those are up
photo.
all over campus right now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's that time of year. So yeah, it was spring. It was at Western, and I sent that over.
That's so amazing that that's the first one. And I wonder too, and I'm going to maybe put up another graphic here for you, whether this also might have inspired your interest in urban animals. So this is another one because and we'll come back to this later on, but I couldn't help
Mhm.
but think of, certain animals that we sometimes regard as pests or vermin or a nuisance in city life. I don't know whether the geese at Western inspired this, but maybe it contributed along the way.
I think the geese contributed. I've always had a soft spot for vermin, as you've noted. I have a pet
Yeah,
pigeon in the other room.
we're
It's
going to
why
talk about
well, yeah, it's why I'm not taking this in my office. It's because that's her space now. She has a lot to say, and I want this to be about me. Um, she's so cute. She's so distracting. Um, yeah, I've always had a soft spot for birds in particular. My mom can attest to this. All of my first drawings were of birds as a kid. Every year at Christmas, I was like, I want books about birding. I want to draw birds, and that was all I wanted to do. And then in recent years, that love has kind of extended towards rats also.
Yeah.
So it started off, I don't know why I was doing this. For some reason, around a year and a half ago, a year ago, I started drawing cartoons where everyone was a rat instead of a person. Just
Yeah.
because it was quick and it was easy, and I was doing it as I was traveling with my mom. But then she was like, I don't want to be a rat. Why would I want to be a rat? And so I was like, oh,
Right.
okay, I guess you'll be something else. And then it became a thing of everyone in my life being assigned a different animal. And
Right.
so that's why that started. Initially, it was just rats. My mom said, not me, though. No.
Right.
And so now it's all different sort of critters. But I've always loved critters and birds in particular.
That's amazing. It's a whole animal farm. I like it a lot.
Yeah.
Something hopefully we can return to in the hour as well. The last time you were with us at Words, it was November of 2020, and you had
Mm.
just recently moved out to the East Coast. And this will help us set the stage for where we begin in the book. Can you tell us, just to start things off, what took you out east?
Yeah, I moved out there because when I was at Western, I was in a relationship. And when we graduated, in our heads, we are like, okay, you're going to move to Wolfville because she was doing teachers college at Acadia, so
Right.
small town in Nova Scotia. I was going to move to Toronto for my master's and would do long distance. And then COVID started as we were graduating. So my program became fully online. And it was like, well, I don't know if I move to Toronto and pay Toronto rent to be long distance with my girlfriend of 3 years when we could just
Yeah.
live together. So we ended up moving to Wolfville together for that year. But that was why I moved out there for love.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's a really, I mean, a very important reason to move out there.
Mm.
In February of 2021, literally months after you joined us on that Words call when you were joining us there, I was thinking about this. I was mapping the timeline of when you had joined us. It would probably been 3 or 4 months later. Your
Mhm.
life would change dramatically. What you
Yeah.
call, and this is to quote you in the book, one of the defining moments of my adult life. Can you tell us more about this defining moment and what happened in the first months of 2021?
Yeah, I At that time I was in my master's, studying creative writing again.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was in my master's. I was also working on the side as still a freelance journalist. I was starting my career as a cartoonist. And so I was using my hands obviously a lot. I think we all use our hands a lot, but I was typing all day long. I was drawing all day long. And suddenly I had a little bit of pain in my wrist and my forearm. And I took it very seriously immediately because my
Mhm.
girlfriend at the time, Danielle, she had studied piano at Western. While she was there, she had actually developed tendonitis.
Right. Yeah.
And she almost couldn't graduate on time. It was really tough for her. It, made her life really difficult while it was happening. And so because I had seen someone go through that, the
Mm.
minute my symptoms started, I went to a physiotherapist. I was like, I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to take it seriously. And I got misdiagnosed as having carpal tunnel.
Right.
And so my symptoms just progressed really, really rapidly, where within the span of, a few weeks, I was in so much pain I could barely type. Everyday tasks were difficult. And yeah, I really thought it would pass quickly. I was like, okay, this is like a weird few weeks thing that's happening.
Yeah.
Especially because that's what my physio was telling me. And it was not it was not a few weeks. Yeah, it became just a really big thing that would ail me for years.
Yeah, it's funny. I was just thinking about this. That would have been the time I think Omicron would have just kind of come onto the scene, and it was a source of second lockdowns across Canada. So
Hmm.
on the one hand, um, you're in school and there's a pandemic, so we couldn't be more health focused in terms of our collective consciousness. So I imagine it would have granted some accommodation to you, to people who are hearing about a health concern, which weirdly had nothing to do with the pandemic. And then on the
Hmm.
other hand, our health system is collapsed for anybody but somebody with a life-threatening condition. So what was it like to have this discovery, this life-altering discovery happen in the midst of a pandemic? I imagine it just threw everything out of sorts.
Yeah, it made it a lot harder because as you noted, the pandemic made it so that anything that was a non-emergency service was really inaccessible. And that makes sense, right? Like the focus was on, you know, people who were very, very sick. And especially I think when you're 23 or yeah, 23, um, you're young and people have this perception that
Yeah,
whatever you're going through will bounce back really quickly.
yeah,
And so it just wasn't, yeah, I get asked all the time, like, well, why didn't you go in for an MRI immediately? Or why didn't you, like go in for proper testing
yeah,
immediately?
exactly.
And it is so important to remind people, like, no, you couldn't do that at the
Yeah,
time. I
yeah.
could not, especially living in Nova Scotia, but without having Nova Scotia ID, because I was technically still an Ontario resident.
Oh,
I
right,
couldn't just walk into a Nova Scotian hospital and be like, hey, I know there's a pandemic, but
right.
my wrists are sore. So yeah, it made it tough. And I do think that if I had been more open about what was happening, my school would have given me accommodations. But at the time, I was so hell bent on having it go away immediately. I was
Right.
so dead set on it being a quick, short, brief thing that I was like, no, I'll just work through it and it'll go away. So I didn't really ask for help until it was much, much too late to ask for help.
Until it advanced.
Yeah.
As your symptoms get worse, as you say, how it was difficult to get dressed. It was difficult to open your mail, to brush your teeth, and you walk
Mm.
through this in the book. But most importantly, it was difficult to write. Can you talk
Hmm.
about how you turn towards voice to text technology and how that odyssey unfolds for you?
Yeah, that was really interesting. I mean, it reached a point where I simply couldn't really type. And when you're doing a creative writing degree, you do have to write, unfortunately. And so I was like, all right, I'll do the voice to text thing. And it was really tough initially, just getting used to the technology is tough in itself. But
Mhm.
once I did, what was difficult for me is that the way we speak and the way we type or set words down on a keyboard are
Right.
fundamentally different, right? And so because I've been a writer for so long, I had this very set idea in my head of this is what my style sounds like, this is what my
Yeah.
work sounds like.
Right.
And suddenly my work did not sound that way anymore. It was different, right? It was more conversational. It was more like how I speak. And I was very resistant to that. I was so unbelievably resistant because I thought if I leaned into the voice to text thing, if I let my style change, I was resigning myself to being disabled or to
Right.
being sick in a long-term way.
Yeah.
So I was like, no, this is just a temporary thing until I get better.
Yeah.
And so I was trying to speak in my writing voice. And then the result is that for a while my writing was simply bad. it just it just wasn't good because it sounded really stilted and awkward, right? It wasn't how I speak or how I write. It was like I was doing a pastiche of myself in a way that was not successful.
Yeah, absolutely. What's so ironic is that, by using voice to text, you kind of lost your voice in a certain way, which voice in the sense
Mm-hmm.
of writerly voice or your sense of style that you had kind of come to know as your writerly voice. And I found this really fascinating because I use text to voice to edit my
Mm-hmm.
own work and to hear it out loud. And sometimes you catch little mistakes, but I've never actually thought about it until I read your book, of turning it the other way. And you say in the
Mm-hmm.
book, things didn't shift until my understanding of disability did. And it
Mm-hmm.
seems that your ability to adapt fluently to voice to text technology, and to other technical aids didn't shift until you began to own or to affirm your identity as somebody with disability. Is that the case?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, I think in my head, I really felt as though if I was okay with using voice to text, if it was something that I leaned into or just, gave into was my feeling, then it meant I wasn't trying to get better anymore.
Right.
And it was just such a frustrating time, right? Because I didn't know what I had. I really thought I just had carpal tunnel and that, I was somehow doing something
Right.
wrong and that's why it wasn't improving.
Yeah.
And so it was just such a bizarre thing where, yeah, I did think that if I used voice to text and I learned how to get good at it and I was okay with the way my style changed, then I was giving up in a way. And I did get over that, right? As you noted, I think it took around a year
Yeah.
into having, pain all of the time. I was like, okay, probably this isn't going away. And I started using it for everything. I was using it to send text messages. I was using it to write. It got to the point where I would be talking with my partner and I'd be like, "Hey, comma, what's for dinner tonight?" Question mark. She'd be like, what did you just say?" But it was because once I leaned into it, I was using it constantly. And so it started shifting the way I
Yeah.
thought about language as well. Yeah.
Right, got right into like the neurology of the way you think. Yeah, it's really
Hmm.
interesting. And one of the things that you say about the book is that this wasn't the book, like this book here was not the book that you intended to write, but
Hmm.
it was the book that you had to write. And I think in a
Hmm.
way, the technology had was in some ways responsible for that shift towards rather than a novel,
Hmm.
memoir. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, when I went into my master's, so an MFA in creative writing, for anyone who's not aware, is the goal at the end is to have a publishable book, right? A manuscript. And I immediately from the beginning, I went in and I said, I'm going to write a novel. And that was the goal.
Right.
And I wrote like 20,000 words of this novel, but
Oh
I had,
wow.
an,
Wow,
yeah, I
20,000 words. Oh my goodness.
I know, and now it's scrapped. It's no one will ever see it. Um, it's gone forever. Because what happened was that I was so excited about it, and I had this really concrete idea. And I think often writers, when you have a book you're really excited about writing, you can picture it so vividly in your mind.
Yeah.
And then basically the summer between first and second year in my program, you're assigned a mentor, and that summer is spent writing the first draft of this book. And so I was working with my mentor, the incredible Kevin Chong, who is awesome and such a great novelist. I love his work. And I was trying to write this book with voice to text, and it wasn't what I had envisioned. I could
Mm,
not properly nail what I wanted to. And it was so frustrating, especially because I was working with this person who I really respected and really admired.
Mm,
I was just so, I hated the book so much, and I was constantly frustrated with myself that I couldn't make the book I wanted to, which
mm,
now I have a lot more grace for myself. But at the time, it was all still so new. It had been less than a year. Um, so yeah, after that, I was like, I need to take a year off school because this is not working and I am not being very nice to myself in this moment.
yeah.
Took a year off. And then, yeah, when I went back, it became very clear to me that I just had a bad relation, that my relationship with that novel was toxic. We did not like each other anymore. And in that time away, I had written a few articles and essays about disability and about my pain. I was sort of coming to terms with it more broadly.
Mm, mm.
And so, yeah, when I came back, I was like, I think that there's actually a book here. And I was right.
Amazing. Yes, you were. And it's fabulous. And your writing leading up is also really so engaging. And I think everybody should check out your writing on disability because it's so good. It's so personal. It's so moving and powerful. Your healthcare journey in this book reads a little bit like a detective story, if I can say it this way. Your
Sure.
symptoms are the new clues to crack the case, and we encounter various suspects along the way. You've mentioned one, carpal tunnel
Hmm.
syndrome, but the prime suspect for a while is thoracic outlet syndrome. The
Hmm.
reader's going to have to wait to read the crack the case eventually where it goes, and I won't spoil that. Though I'm very curious to see if a healthcare specialist read your descriptions of your symptoms, whether they'd be able to crack the case and get to the end diagnosis. But disability and illness is an inescapable element of human experience. But I think it's safe to say you didn't expect this at the age of 23. For others who will go through a similar experience, could you reflect on what you learned about the healthcare system and how it treats disability, especially for younger people along the way?
Yeah, it's bad. It's not good. Um, yeah, I mean, I think I also had the disadvantage of moving. Spoiler, I move 3 times in this book,
Right.
or twice, I guess. I go from Nova Scotia to Toronto to Quebec, Montreal. And because of that, I haven't had a family doctor or like a primary healthcare person.
Mm.
I've been on the wait list for 3.5 years in Montreal. Hasn't happened yet. Probably never will.
Wow.
But here's to hoping. Um,
Is that so? You've been in Montreal for that long and you have not been able to get a family doctor in that time?
no, I signed up on the wait list as soon as I got here. But that's the thing is like I think it's hard regardless, but especially if you don't have a primary care physician, it's tough because you're going to random walk-in clinics, you're going to different places every time. And then when you do get a test result back or any sort of answer, you're just kind of left to sit with that on your own. Whereas if you
Mhm.
have one person or one doctor to go back to, that can be someone who's guiding you versus navigating it on your own. So that made it a lot harder. I think generally too, my my symptoms and my diagnosis probably would have been caught a lot sooner and would have been, you know, stopped in their tracks if
Yeah.
not for the fact that I think my pain wasn't taken very seriously. I think
Yeah.
people just didn't understand the severity of it, no matter how often I explained it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I guess even if you do have a family doctor, it can still be tough depending on what that person is like. I wouldn't know because I haven't had the chance to have one. But yeah, it's I don't know. We're lucky in Canada to have free healthcare, but it is slow and not always very open or great
Mhm.
at guiding people where they need to go.
Right. And one of the places where I started to laugh out loud the hardest in the book was reading your first encounter with Lena or Laura or
Yeah,
Linda or Leia.
yeah.
So you do have these encounters and you illustrate very clearly. And I think actually your book would be so important for for medical students to read in terms of
Mm,
paying attention to the stories of those who are undergoing um, chronic illness, who are going through disability experience. And I think actually this is a really good segue into
mm.
a passage that you've selected
Should I
maybe
do a little reading?
you should do a little reading
I
for us.
have a little reading. Do we want a little reading?
Yes.
For anyone who has the book at home, if you want to read along, you could. It's page 96. Um, though I do skip a page in the middle. I'm reading from a chapter called Barbecue Leftovers, and it's about med students, I guess. Um, Barbecue leftovers. I read online about a surgery, a friend of John's told me. He was one of those people I saw every now and then by virtue of having friends in common, though we'd never hang out one on one. He was a medical student, a fact he never let anyone forget. It always came up, one way or another. He'd had a hard day at work, doing his placement as a medical student. He was emotionally exhausted, from learning how to deal with patients as a medical student. He'd seen someone dressed as a doctor on Halloween, which was funny to him as a real doctor, or rather, a medical student, which is just the larval form of a real doctor. He'd gone to the grocery store earlier where he was a medical student. Had he mentioned he was in med school, by the way? Though this could be annoying, I mostly found it endearing. There's something interesting about watching someone be so proud about what they did, or almost did, that they mentioned it as often as they could, scouring every conversation for the right place to drop in the information. It was almost exciting. Every time we talked, I found myself guessing where it might get wedged in, trying to figure out how a conversation about IKEA or a TV show might transform into one about med school. Every now and then, though, the med school talk crossed the line from endearing to irritating. I would struggle to sit patiently as he explained the impact of chronic pain on mental health to me, a mentally ill person with chronic pain. Every time I opened my mouth to speak, I would be interrupted with clumsy and often incorrect explanations of topics I actually understood quite well. There were also moments when his stories about school got repetitive. He loved recounting events in a way that framed himself as a hero, which was how he felt. Every patient steadily inflated his ego, and he relished in telling us about how he'd managed to cure them. This particular evening, it seemed, he'd finally cast his attention onto me as a new person to fix. I looked over at him. You read about a surgery? I asked. We were sitting on the couch together at John and Maria's house. I was thumbing through a book while he worked on his laptop. John's cat, Greg, purred loudly between us. Yeah, I've been reading a bunch of papers on your nerve thing. I'd never heard about it, so I wanted to become more educated. Right. You know, as a medical student, it feels important to learn as much as possible. There's so much we miss in school. Sure, I said. That makes sense. I thought it was weird that he'd never actually just asked me about my medical condition before skipping to peer-reviewed literature, but I didn't say this out loud. I mean, I just wanted to know more. He closed his laptop and turned his whole body towards me, serious now. I was reminded of all those sessions I'd had with doctors or specialists in sterile rooms, their voices stern. I took a deep breath and prepared for what I knew would be an exhausting conversation. Greg, the cat, climbed into my lap, upset that I'd stopped petting him. The surgery. Are you familiar with it? People have this habit of Googling my nerve condition and assuming that, in their few minutes of research, they've learned something about it that I've somehow missed. Though I know this is well intentioned, it does make me wonder if they think I'm stupid. As though, in my years of having nerve pain, I've never once bothered to look it up. As though they might say, I was Googling last night and learned about a surgery. Have you looked into that? And I might answer, no, I'd never thought to turn to Google. The reality was that I'd been familiar with the surgery for about as long as I'd been familiar with my condition. Within hours of learning the words thoracic outlet syndrome, I'd scoured Google to read medical journals and blog posts about different solutions. I won't pretend to be someone with much knowledge about medical procedures or their severity. Luckily for me, the seriousness of TOS surgery is simple to understand by its very nature. It goes like this: they remove one of your ribs. When I first read about this, I instinctively touched my fingers to the place right under my collarbone where my first rib was. I learned that by removing this rib, the surgery gives your nerves more space to breathe. They become less compressed, and your pain eases. I wasn't considering surgery as a real option, still convinced that I might heal and move on as though this had never happened. There was one aspect of the surgery that particularly interested me, though, and so I opened a new tab on Google and clicked the voice to text button. Alone in my apartment, I spoke a burning question out loud. Are you allowed to keep surgically removed bones? Sitting on the couch in Montreal a full year later, I let John's friend explain the surgery to me as though I'd never heard of it. He talked to me about its success rate, not great, the recovery time, pretty long, and why I might consider it. I didn't want to. I nodded along, barely listening, waiting for him to finish talking. When he finally did, I imagined he expected me to thank him for all this research he'd done, to say, wow, I didn't know any of that. You're a very clever boy. Instead, I leaned back and asked the same question I'd asked whenever the surgery was brought up. And if I got this surgery, do you think they'd let me keep the rib? What? Could I keep the rib? Oh, he frowned. I don't know. Medical school has some blind spots, I thought. This, to me, seemed like pretty important information. Guess, then, what are the odds I could keep it? At this point, I'd done enough Googling to know the answer was maybe, but probably not. Besides, the rib wouldn't come out cleanly the way I'd first imagined it. They usually had to cut it up to extract it, so it was little chunks of bone. Still, I pictured being handed a clean, full rib, like something left on your plate after a big meal at a barbecue restaurant. I don't know, John's friend repeated. Why would you want it? I think it would be funny, I said. This was the honest answer. I liked the idea of someone coming over and walking up to my bookshelf, which was full of knickknacks. They'd pick up the rib and turn to me, holding the curved piece of bone in their hand. What's this? They'd ask, to which I would answer, oh, that? It's my rib. There was so much potential for humor here. I imagined all the Adam and Eve jokes I could make. I thought about displaying the rib in a glass case, like a dinosaur bone or a fossil at a museum. Were the rib to be chopped up, I imagined using pieces of it in jewelry. When people asked what my beautiful earrings were made out of, I could answer, oh, these? They are my rib.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Wow, so good. And so good.
Thanks. Thanks.
And someone in the chat, Catherine Morrissey, said, you are marvelous. Thank you for telling your important story. What a joy to hear you read. I
Oh, thank
completely
you so
agree.
much.
I think that's a good intervention for that remark right there.
Thanks.
One of the things I thought of when I read this passage was, or this particular chapter, was a series that we did early on in the Words Festival. It was a narrative medicine series called Stories of Illness and Health. And we did it at the London Public Library. You probably remember Wolf Hall down at the library where we did it, which invited patient storytellers who had experienced chronic or acute illness to tell their story to an audience of medical professionals, medical and nursing students, artists, the general public. And the aim of it was to try to attend to the stories of these people who had experienced acute or chronic illness to improve patient-centered care. And we would bring in stories from all over for this particular event. I'm setting up this question this way alongside of what you just read to ask the question, if you were advising students like John and Maria's friend who are entering the health system, who are encountering someone like you, confused, anxious, disoriented about what's happening to your body, what could they do to improve the experience of care on that front line? What would you wanted to have seen from somebody on the front line when you came in?
I think just listening is the big thing. Even with, that character in that essay, John and Maria's friend, I think that the big issue there, though, I mean, he wasn't like a harmful person or anything, but
Right.
it
Yeah.
was just the not listening, right? And I think that does become harmful when it's actually in a professional care setting and someone is telling you, this is
Hmm.
what I'm experiencing, this is what I'm going through. And I think it can be really easy for medical professionals to have a specific idea of, again, like this person is young, works at a computer a lot. It's probably just carpal tunnel and
Right.
not actually engaging enough. But
Yeah.
if someone is telling you that they're experiencing something that it's more severe or serious than you think, it's probably because it is. That's the big thing is I think just really actually actively listening to whatever is being told to you.
Right. And chasing what you're saying rather than a cure, or chasing something, so that they can fix it. Here's the surgery rather than listening. Because I think you say in the passage, he's already onto peer reviewed literature before he's even asked you a little
Yeah.
bit about what you're going through. So
Hmm.
that's a perfect moment of what you're describing. As a reader, we first learn that you are facing disability, and it's in the opening chapter as we
Mm.
overhear a back and forth conversation on a first date where you're
Yes.
confronted with the choice of whether or not to disclose your disability. And it's
Hmm.
interesting, as I was reading that, I thought about it. There's almost a weird responsibility that people impose on people with disability to self narrate their story
Hmm.
or their medical diagnosis, as if to say, what happened to you, but in a way that's going to be, reassuring for them. What is it about the dynamics of dating or of dating life that drew your writerly brain to explore this element of your personal life in the book?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And it is something where now that the book is out in public, I'm like, why did I write about this so publicly? I'm like, oh my God, people are gonna read this. Um, I think for me, they felt really tied together because, that partner, Danielle, she and I broke up with or not long after my symptoms started. And
Yeah,
so this really interesting thing happened because we dated for about 4 years where I was starting to date again at the same time as I was learning
right.
to live with, this new disability.
Yeah.
And so they were really intrinsically tied together where I was like, I don't really know how to date. And I also don't know how to talk about this. And so it became like I moved to this new city and I was meeting people on dates all the time. And it was just this really loaded thing, at least in my head, of feeling like I think it's important to mention this or to talk
Mm,
about it because especially at the time it was such a big part of my life and it took up so much of my brain space. Like it was constantly on my mind. It was the only thing I was thinking about because it was still so new. um so yeah, trying to broach it was difficult and not knowing how people would react or not knowing how to talk about it. And that first date, the reason, and this now feels so funny. When I did the audiobook, I could not stop cracking up as I was reading that part. And at the time, it felt devastating.
yeah.
But in retrospect, it's funny. That one was one where I told this person that I was dealing with chronic pain, and he was also a journalist. And I was like, yeah, I like couldn't type, right? I can't type. I couldn't type at all at the time. I can't type, whatever. And he went, wow, if I was you, I would have killed myself.
Wow.
And I was like, what a thing to say. What
Yeah.
a crazy thing to say. And now it's like, water off a duck's back. It's been long enough that I'm like emotionally prepared for whatever it brings. But at the time, I was just really taken by the
Yeah.
extent to which people don't know how to talk about disability, or at least not to not saying you would kill yourself, I think is a good start for sure.
Right. And your book is such a great, I mean, it's an enjoyable read, but also it gives people an empathetic ability to see inside your inner life of what you're going through as a way of empathizing with you, a critical vocabulary on how to engage. So I hope people do, if they have somebody in their life who is going through disability, your book, I hope,
Mhm.
will be something that they'll turn to as a way of engaging in those conversations. Have they gotten easier for you, those conversations? I imagine water off a
Oh
duck's
yeah.
back, but do people still have that inability? Are you able to kind of ease them in a little bit?
Yeah, I think I've also, it's both, right? Like I am, first of all, way less clumsy about it. Like I'd know how to talk about it because at the time I still didn't really know what I had. I didn't know how to talk about it. It was so new. It was also, secondly, like really emotional still at the
Right.
time. And
Yeah.
so I would try and find a way to talk about it without like getting really emotional because that's, you don't want to be on a first date and have the person across you be like, I'm going through this thing. Um, yeah. And so both of those were hard. And then also just the fact that my symptoms themselves were harder at the time or worse at the
Mm,
time. And so it was just a bigger part of my life, right? It still is a huge part of my life. It's so fundamental to everything I do, but at the time, because it was so severe and because it was so new still, it really, I couldn't do anything without that being the first thing I was thinking of, right? I'm on these dates and I'm sitting in my little bar stool and I'm in pain. And so, yeah, it was an interesting thing. But, looking back, there's also a lot of humor in those responses. I wanted the book to be funny.
yeah, it is.
And I think especially in dating, it was just a gold mine for things that were unexpectedly humorous. Yeah.
Yeah. Has your approach to humor changed because of the experience? I imagine you always had an approach to humor in your writing, but the inner life of going through disability experience, I imagine, has shifted how you regard, how you write, even how you draw.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was such a big thing for me because humor's always been part of my work, especially, as a cartoonist, like you
Yeah,
have to, those are just jokes that you're drawing. Um, so humor's always been a part of my work, but when this all started, it didn't feel funny at all,
right.
right? And I
Yeah,
think, there's a way of telling the story that's not funny at all. And there are moments in the book that aren't funny at all. But I think after enough time had passed, it became clear to me that, this wasn't a temporary thing. This was going to be forever. And all you can do is laugh. At a certain point, to continue, because I still have immense moments of grief or of sadness about what I went through and, the life I might have lived otherwise.
mhm,
But if I wallow in that all of the time, like that's not a life, right? But there is so much that's genuinely very funny if
yeah.
you allow yourself to think that way. And so, yeah, I think my approach to humor has changed. I think I'm quicker to laugh at or with myself for sure.
Right. And I think as a reader, you are going through very difficult subjects, that well-timed, you know, um, approach for humor allows your reader in and allows your reader to come the other way as well.
Mm,
One of
I
the
hope so.
yeah, it definitely does. When
Hmm.
I was going through, I found it very, very funny. All sorts of moments, and as I mentioned, right from the beginning with Lena, Laura, Linda, that when
Hmm.
I was dying. One of the topics that comes up frequently on your dates in the book is your negotiation with how to explain what it is that you do as a freelancer. And you
Mm.
struggle to self-edit on this topic almost as much as you do with the question of disability, which
Hmm.
points to potentially a linkage between the two, from horse news to fact checking to Harlequin romance writing. Can I put it that way?
Yeah,
Your
sure.
your freelance work has been quite varied. How has disability informed that approach to freelance work? Has it changed how you do
Hmm.
freelance work?
Yeah, totally. I think when I started freelancing, so I graduated from Western, I left the Gazette, um, and in my head, I wanted to freelance until I found a staff position at a newspaper, right? I was like, freelancing is a temporary thing, and then I'm gonna get there. I'm gonna get whatever staff job, and that's it. And now I can't imagine actually having a 9 to 5 or working in a newsroom because having the freedom to, work for a few hours and then go to a physio appointment or work for an hour and then take a break to stretch because I'm in pain is
Mm,
really crucial. And also
mm,
having, I have a very like ergonomic setup in my office. I have a really well positioned workspace, which I think I could do if I wasn't a freelancer, but would be harder.
Yeah.
And even just having varied kinds of work, as you mentioned, I do fact checking, I do writing. I think it's a lot more well balanced now than when I was starting freelancing. The issue was that I was really worried if I said no to any opportunity, I would
Right.
never get it again, and my work would dry up, and that would be it. So I said yes to everything in a way that was a problem. I had way too much
Right.
work. Why was I writing erotica professionally? I didn't have to do that. But, you
So
know,
on that point,
yeah,
true or false question, is there
sure.
out in the world somewhere an original Drolet erotica pot boiler that climbs to a staggering 70,000 words?
Yep. Longer, yes. Longer than my book,
Longer than the
which
20,000 words of
is,
the novel.
yeah. I think longer than
Longer
this.
than this book. Okay.
I think,
So
which is shocking. I don't know how I produced that much. And the pay was bad. It was a friend of mine who worked at a newspaper I won't name, one of the big Canadian newspapers, who saw that I was looking for work. And she had messaged me being like, hey, I, I'm underpaid, you're underpaid. I've been doing this job. Do you want in? And I was like, that sounds funny. I'll do it, sure. Um, which is not a good reason to accept a job. But yeah, it was just a summer of really, I don't know, I think with my hands being like, I need to say yes to whatever comes. Everything is expensive, physio's expensive, whatever. What a horrible job that was. It was really fun. It was fun for the first few weeks. And then I was like, I don't know what I'm doing.
70,000 words is a lot of words.
It's too many words.
Yeah.
I can't believe that.
Someday someone's going to collect it together and it's going to be the unpublished work of Gabrielle Drolet.
Well, you know what's funny is the app that I was doing it for, because it was like a choose your own adventure app. So the way
Okay.
it would work is that I would write a scenario or whatever, and then it would say, do you A, whatever, and then B, and B would be like a scandalous option, and it would cost $1 to
Ah,
pick. That's how the
right.
app made money. But the app apparently has shut down. So it might be
Oh,
gone. It might be gone with the wind, which would be better.
which would be better and it would
Yeah.
erase the record. Well, I mean, I think we've just sold 50 books of this already, just at the thought of maybe there's going to be some insight into
Into
the
that world. Yeah.
the lost erotica novella or novel of
Yeah.
Gabrielle Drolet.
Full novel. Yeah,
Full
which is
novel, full
full
novel.
novel. Yeah.
Um, we've talked a bit about, or we've talked quite a bit about your chronic pain and how it changed your writing, but I wonder if we could talk about how it changed your relationship to drawing and cartooning.
Hmm.
How long did it take to get back to cartooning?
Um, Too long. I think it's tough because with writing, there's so much adaptive technology. You can use voice to text, you can, whatever.
Yeah.
But with drawing, that doesn't really exist in the same way. And so, yeah, there was a while where every time I went back and tried to draw, it was just really hard. It was really painful. Um, so I would say it took probably about a year, maybe longer than that, before I started drawing regularly again. In that year, there were moments where I'd be like, oh, I'll draw a quick thing, and then it would hurt a lot.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, a year. And then now I'm lucky I draw quite a lot, obviously, for work, but still it's a very ergonomic setup and drawing is far harder on my body than anything else. So I'm
Right.
taking a lot of breaks. I'm still seeing, I got my physio and my massage therapist who I
Still
love.
Noah?
Yeah, yes, who it's funny, I had to change his name for legal reasons. Most of the names are changed. Even Greg the cat was not named
I
Greg
was
the
gonna say
cat.
Greg the cat is
Yeah,
name.
I was trying to think of the funniest possible cat name, or just like the worst possible cat name, and Greg felt like the right one. Um,
Greg would collect royalties. Greg the kitten,
yeah, Greg the
if he
kitten.
was properly named.
Yeah, but it was a funny thing where I love my physiotherapist Noah so much. Same thing with my unnamed massage therapist, who's not actually in the book at all, but is like a background hero.
Right.
And initially in my acknowledgments, I named them both like by their actual names. And then the book's lawyer had to come back and be like, hey, because you changed the name in the book, you can't name them in the acknowledgments because then people will know who it is. Which was too bad because yeah, he's the best. But yeah, I'm able to keep drawing because I have like a great medical team.
Right. Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. I've got a few more questions for Gabrielle, but anytime people want to throw some questions in, you can do that, and I'm going to take them up here at the end. So throw your questions or comments into the Q&A so I can find them more easily, and we'll bring those up. In recent years, you've also made a transition from working primarily with digital software to take up watercolors. Could you tell
Mm.
us a little bit about why that was something or how that came to be?
Yeah, what a fun question. No one's ever asked me that before. That's awesome. I I don't know. I bought a really cheap watercolor set, one of those like Crayola watercolor sets for kids. And just because I had never really tried using it before, I had always done digital work. Prior to that, I did some like traditional stuff, but professionally for the cartoons I do with the Globe and the New Yorker,
Mm,
digital is just easier because you can edit them more quickly, and there always are edits to be done.
yeah.
And so, yeah, but then suddenly, I guess I would say 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, um, I bought this watercolor set and I was just kind of playing around with it, and I ended up really loving it. Bye, Madeline. Um, we'll catch up soon properly. I'm gonna be in London in the fall, so we'll grab coffee. Um, yeah, I bought this watercolor set. I was having so much fun with it. And then I just started doing way more traditional cartooning. I still I still do some digital stuff. Like everything I do for publications tends to be digital first because it's easier.
Right.
But yeah, the majority of the work that I do for my print shop and for fun, and even every drawing in this was done traditionally. I have just a drawer full of like ink drawings. Yeah, I don't know. I think it just the difficulty with doing stuff digitally is that you can edit it so much, and
Right.
it's really easy to get really in your head and redo something over and over and over. And I really like the looseness of doing physical sort of analog work where you only have one shot. The way it is the way it is. And it's also fun to then have physical original copies of everything, I think is really cool.
Yeah. Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. Yeah, and same with when you get your New Yorker copy, right? You get the physical
Yeah.
copy of the actual card. That's a great transition too. So on the cover of the book, we see some of these drawings here. I'll see if I can throw it up of
Yeah.
the bird that appears in the book, and it looks very uncannily like a bird named Pidgey. Could you tell
Does.
us a little bit about Pidgey? And I might even have a graphic here that I could help to illustrate.
Oh my God, look at her. God, that's the perfect bird. God, she's so cute. It's so crazy. I also want to point out my one of my favorite details in the book is that there's like a secret little bird on the inside cover on both of them,
Yes.
which I think is really fun. My publisher pushed that, and I thought that was cool. Um, yeah, my publisher did a great job with the
It's a
cover of it
very
all.
attractive book. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I'm really happy we landed in an awesome place. Yeah, Pidgey is a bird that I got from the SPCA about almost 2 years ago, a year and a half ago. I wanted a pet, and because I live alone, I didn't want a dog 'cause dogs are a lot of work and I think
Yeah.
difficult if you live by yourself. I didn't want a cat because I like my stuff too much. I think I uh I love cats. I really love cats, but I babysat Greg of the book for a while, and he really loved. Oh, there he is. It's
That's
Greg.
Greg.
That's Greg. Oh,
Greg the kitten in a box.
yeah, he's so cute. Greg loved scratching my couch, and it made me very quickly realize because I move into this apartment in the book. It's my
Yeah.
first
Same
ever
apartment.
same apartment, first ever adult apartment. I have too much stuff that I like now, and I was like, in a few years when I've settled down, I can get a cat. But that kind of left birds, and I've always loved birds. So I was looking at my local humane society, looking at the website, and suddenly they had this dove for $15. I was like, huh? Like what? you could have a dove. Like I didn't know any of this. And
Yeah.
so I told myself I'm gonna go. I went to Guelph for my convocation for my master's. And I said, if I come home and she's still there, I'll get her. I came home and she was still there, and we've been besties ever since. She
And
rocks.
how long has it been that she's been with
A year and a half, almost 2 years.
you? Year and a half, 2 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you tell me what a fliper is? Rather than
Yeah, I probably have it somewhere. It's like her little diaper that she wears, her little pants. Because both it's both a blessing and a curse. Pidgey is a very social bird. She wants to sit with my friends. She wants to be on their heads in particular. She wants to sit on your lap while we watch TV. Like she loves, if the office door was open, she would be here right now. But she also loves to shit. And so, and that's the reality of having a bird, right? It's
yeah.
both. And so to be a member of polite society, I think if you want to sit on someone's head, you also have to wear a little diaper. She's not very happy about it, but I do think that's the solution.
Right. So there you go. That's a detail I did not know until I was researching your book and discovered that there is such a thing as called a fliper, a
Yeah.
diaper for birds, which is really amazing. I'm trying to
Yeah.
pull up another image here because we had talked about this a little bit at the top, but I'd like to just, I can't help but ask you about this now that I have,
Mm,
this is completely selfish question on my behalf
sure.
to ask you about this. But so this started off a whole thing called Rattober. Can you
Yeah,
tell us about Rattober?
absolutely. Actually, I wasn't going to get into this because I thought it was too nitty gritty, but now that we're here,
Yeah.
this was the first watercolor thing I ever drew. Um,
Wow.
yes.
This here.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
So the story behind this is that there was a video on Twitter or on social media circulating of these little rats kind of popping their heads out of a sewer grate like a whack-a-mole game. And it was so cute, I found. It was so sweet. And so I drew this and I painted it pretty crudely. But then what happened is that painting went viral. It like did very well, and people started asking me like, "Oh, can you make prints of it?" I at the time did not own a printer or like didn't know how to make prints. I now, which is funny because a few years out, I now run a print shop, which is mostly prints of rat drawings. And I draw myself as a rat in all of my cartoons.
Which
This
is
is
amazing.
why. This is the origin of all of that. So I started because I didn't have a printer. I was selling these paintings to order. So you could order one and then I would paint it for you. So my first step into watercolor was very intense because I think it was over 130 of these.
Wow. That is 130 of these.
Yeah, it took months. It took a very long time. I kept emailing people being like, I'm so sorry, I did not expect to get this many this many rat orders. And
Wow.
so after that, it became a thing of people being like, could you draw the New York City rats doing this? Could you draw them doing this? Could you draw them doing this? And so then in October, I committed myself to drawing a rat every day, just a different one. I did the same thing in February. And now, a few years out, I draw myself exclusively as a rat in my cartoons. Rats are very central to my work, which is very random. There are no rats in the book. But in my personal life and the art that I make for fun, it's very rat centric because of this one drawing randomly.
That, I mean, that's a transformational drawing. And the first I didn't know that that was the first watercolor. So
Yeah.
that's a really interesting tie.
Hmm.
Very cool. I have a question here from Robin Easterbrook. Do you find
Hmm.
it difficult changing your professional voice between places like the New Yorker cartoons, other publications, and even this latest book?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's getting a little bit easier now. But it was really tough in the beginning because when I first started my career, I was straddling sort of these two lines of doing sort of like serious journalism. I was writing a lot of reported content. I was, doing reporting, like reporting these political pieces and culture pieces for that weren't at all personal. There was no personal angle. It was just like third person reporting. And then at the same time as I was doing that, I was also doing like cartoons and sillier like shouts and murmurs for the New Yorker. And that felt really odd because I think in journalism school or in like when you're learning to be a journalist or a writer, you're kind of told to find a beat or to find a voice and stick to it. And so I had a really hard time figuring out how to do both of those things. And actually, I think it doesn't really matter. Like people can separate, oh, you do the silly thing and you do the serious thing.
Mhm.
But now it feels like they've all kind of married into each other, where my writing, even the writing about stuff that is more serious, generally is still personal. It's been a while since I've done a reported piece that wasn't in some way um, a personal essay or didn't have a personal angle, which is interesting. I didn't realize that it had been a while, but yeah, now they all feel married in a way that I think is special.
A very rich answer. Thank you for that. That's really good.
Mhm.
Lexi Salt hasn't. This is a really great question, Lexi. How have you found community in terms of your lived experience of chronic pain, disability, and art? Who are the folks you go to access, support, and celebrate joy? And I think this question brings in a lot of, there's a friend group element in the book that I think this question speaks to as well.
Mhm.
Australian Casey, other Casey,
Yeah.
Michelle, a whole group. So over to you.
Yeah. I I'm so lucky to have such great friends. I mean, I think when all of this was first starting, it was also, everything was really online. It was very pandemic times. And I was really lucky to find community or just like solace with other people with chronic pain or people who
Mhm.
were disabled online on Twitter, just like people who I wouldn't say I was super close friends with, but had some level of camaraderie or could turn to and be like, hey, you use voice to text, like what's your advice on this, whatever. But the key people in my life have been my friends. And I
Mm.
feel really lucky because I moved here, as this was all happening, and I didn't work in person. All of my work is remote. My school was online. And so I was like, I hope I'm able to meet people. And I just got really lucky with meeting friends who are really sympathetic. And, I've had people who weren't as good at understanding it, or,
Mm.
people who either you reassess that relationship or you sit them down and explain it to them well. But for the most part, I've just had really incredible friends who, even if they haven't experienced chronic pain, are so understanding. One thing I always say is I think a mark of how well surrounded I am is the fact that I don't think I've opened a can of beer for myself in years, right? And it's just a thing of if I'm with friends and we're, you know, cold
Yeah.
ones with the boys or whatever, um, the moment that someone hands me a beer, they instinctively know to open it for me, right? And it's little things like that that have just made me so tremendously lucky.
Yeah, absolutely. Another really terrific question, great answer. And it's such a huge part of the book, the community and friendship that you've cultivated in not only in Montreal, but of course you follow out a gazetter from Toronto into Montreal. So your relationships have been such a formative thing, and it's a beautiful thing to
Hmm.
read. This is a good question. Derek Bourassa asks, you mentioned voice being different with the voice to text. Can you speak to that in terms of humor and how that
Hmm.
carries through into the writing?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Derek. I think hmm, mulling it over because I've never thought about that, but it is such an interesting thing.
Yeah.
Where I think obviously my voice when I'm speaking is way more conversational than my written voice is, and I think maybe that did make it easier to be a little bit funnier. Um, just because I think the book is, and not to toot my own horn or whatever, but I think it's funny in a way that feels casual. They're not super
Right.
like canned or like planned bits, but rather it's funny in the same way that like a conversation with your friends is funny.
Yeah.
Because it was just like, I'm speaking into this microphone. I was recording or doing my voice to text stuff, and I think when you're talking, sometimes you'll naturally come to a thing that feels funny in a way that when you're writing, it feels like you have to think a lot harder.
Right.
So yeah, maybe that's part of it. Just speaking and having this really natural, sort of place of landing on jokes instead of having to think of them too hard.
Yeah, and you've noted in the book, and it's interesting. This is where your great essayist, writerly voice enters in at times. That other artists in history, from John Milton's Paradise Lost to Henry James, also
Mhm.
relied on dictation. And you mentioned this. I didn't know this until I was reading your book. Of Henry James also finding discomfort when he transitioned into dictation as well. So it's something you're in a long history and a long line of people who've had to negotiate translating your voice over into dictation.
Yeah, yeah, it is. No, it's a really long, rich history. It's been hundreds of years that people have used dictation, and I think the only difference is now we have technology where we can do it ourselves without going to you know, a second person or someone in the room with you. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's been a long history, and so I think there's something to it, right? And a lot of people write this way by choice too, which is interesting to me. I know Richard Powers does that, and Dan Brown of the Da Vinci Code,
Other Dan
appa-
Brown. Yeah.
other Dan Brown, allegedly that book was written with voice of text just for kicks, I guess.
That's bonkers.
Yeah.
I thought I'd read this comment because it's very heartwarming from Catherine Morrissey. You have become a deep and powerful for the rest of us. Thank you for your determination. Oh, I forgot. You are funny and you are determined to be a humorist. Damn it, you are funny. So there we go. There we are.
Thank you so much. That should be the next the pull quote for the second printing.
Yeah, I agree. I
Yeah,
agree.
thank you so much. It's really sweet. And that was the goal. I really wanted to make people laugh. And it's funny, I think sometimes because the topic is quite serious, and there are moments in the book that are serious, people my friend Simon read it for the first time when it was, not even in book form, it was like a PDF. And he texted me and he was like, "Is it okay that I'm laughing sometimes?" And I was like, "Yes, please, please, please." But yeah, I think it's an interesting thing of people, being like, "Wait, am I allowed to laugh at this?" The answer is yes, you can laugh at me. I give you my permission.
Amazing. Derek Bourassa has another question.
Sure.
When voice to text writing, are you sitting down in front of a blank screen and going for it, or is there a series of preparatory notes? Are you outlining in
Hmm.
the traditional sense with this method? How has this evolved?
Another really great question. Thank you. It depends a lot. This book was written at a very breakneck speed, like insanely quickly. Because as I noted earlier, I was trying to write that novel. It didn't work out. I had to leave school. I came back. And when I came back, I had essentially 6 months to write the book. So all of my classmates had already written books they were editing. I had nothing. I was starting from scratch. So because I wrote it so quickly, I did not take very many preparatory notes for most of these essays. I was just
Mhm.
like sitting down. One of the essays in here is called Cross Country Skiing. It's about cross country skiing. And it's one of my favorites in the book, but that came about because I told my advisor, I emailed him on like a Wednesday, and I was like, "I'll try and get you a new essay next week. I'm going cross country skiing this weekend." And he said, "Write about that." And that's kind of a joke. I did.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, because it was written so quickly, what I'm getting at is that I was really just going for it in a way that's not usual for me. So often it
Mhm.
was a blank page. And sometimes I would have some notes of just like, here are the key things I want to hit on. I think the
Hmm.
notes came in more when I was editing because I would just have these like things I'd written. And often when I'm doing voice to text, I'm not editing as I'm going because usually as you're writing, you'll be like, "Oh, I don't like that sentence." You go back.
Yeah.
With voice to text, if you stop, you kind of lose your flow. So the notes would come in after. But interestingly, yeah, for most of the first drafts of this, I had no notes, just talking because it's harder to plan out as you go than with writing.
Yeah. And that actually addresses a question from Mila where she asked about how long did it take to write the book in total?
Yeah, so it was from January to so about 6 months. January to May was the first draft, which was I wouldn't recommend. I wouldn't recommend that. It worked in that I got a draft out, but it was really quite messy. I'm very, very grateful to my thesis advisor, Michael Winter, who did an amazing job of guiding me through it. Like I would write an essay, send it to him. He'd send me back edits. I'd send the next one. Like it was really back and forth, super fast. But then interestingly, editing it took about 2 years.
Oh,
So
wow. Wow.
yeah, the publisher bought it in October of 2023. So almost 2 years ago. And then it took a long time to edit. And I think even if I'd taken longer to write it, that would have been the case. Like publishing is quite slow. But
Mm.
yeah, like it's not too different from what I wrote for school, but the order of the essays is very different, the chronology of it. I cut the
Ah.
fat on some of it. Like some of the essays I simply removed. Some of them I extended. And I found the things that mattered most to me. But yeah, it was interesting. The first draft was quick, and it was the editing that took the most time and thought.
Hmm. We've lost the erotica novel with the loss of the app.
Yep,
We're throwing out the 20,000 words that no one will ever see of that first novel. Could you ever
yep,
see returning to the novel format as something that you're interested in writing?
absolutely. I'm working on one right now.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my goodness, exclusive. I think this is the first time I've said that. Um, yeah, I loved writing this book and it was really special to me. And I would love to write more nonfiction. Like it's always been foundational in my career, but I think also I keep joking. I'm like, unless something else really bad happens to me, I don't know that I have another memoir in me right now. Um, I feel very lucky right now in that my life is really full and awesome, and I just don't know that there's enough. And I could be wrong, but right now, I think I also this book, while I love it and I'm so happy it's out in the world,
Hmm.
there is something particularly taxing about writing about your life and about talking about it, especially when it was something that was really difficult. So
Yeah.
currently, I think the next book will be fiction, and we'll see. Maybe that'll change, but right now, I want to explore the problems of someone who are not me.
I like it. I like it a lot.
Yeah.
There's a question here from Julian Lawrence, and I'm gonna ask the question, but also maybe add something to it as well. He says,
Mm.
"Great reading and engaging conversation. Thank you. Here's a question for you. Are you familiar with graphic medicine?" I'm actually not, but I want to add to
Mm.
this question. You're a huge fan of graphic novels,
I am.
and you've reviewed a few graphic novels.
Yeah.
Would you ever be interested in doing your own? I don't know whether, the Rats have a graphic novel trajectory in them or not. Open
Yeah.
question over to you.
I first of all, I haven't heard of graphic medicine. Let me Google it real quick. Um, Graphic medicine.
I haven't heard of it
Um,
either.
I'm not familiar. Well, to answer your question, I'm not familiar with it. But I will look further. Oh, it looks to be. I'll look further into this later, so I'm not being too rude. But literally, like graphic novels or comics about medicine, which is really interesting. No, I haven't heard of it, but I will. I will be looking into it because, as Josh noted, I love graphic novels. I love reading long form comics of any kind. I don't know that I would write one at any point in the near future. The thing is, graphic novels, love them, adore them. They take so long to write.
Right.
And I think, especially as I've noted, drawing is harder on my body than writing is. And something of that scale with that many
Mm.
drawings and that much time, like usually it's years from inking to coloring or whatever. And some of that stuff you could outsource, I guess. Like you could get someone to color your book for you. That's a common practice. But I think if I wanted to do a graphic novel, I would want to do it fully myself, and I'm just not there yet. I think even in terms of, I don't know, just having a story, I think I would have to have something that in my head I'm like, a graphic novel is the only way to tell this. 'Cause yeah, every graphic novel I
Mm.
love, I'm like, oh, this could not have been a novel.
Right.
But it is an interesting thing. I don't know if people in the chat are familiar with Will McPhail. He is um, a cartoonist for the New Yorker. And he was here this weekend in Montreal for a comic arts festival, and he has an amazing graphic novel, an incredible graphic novel called In, which I love. And he was saying, he was like, yeah, I think the next book is a novel. And I had this moment initially of being like, no, but you're such a good cartoonist. You could do so many. And then I had to be like, no, because sometimes some stories are just not meant to be graphic novels, and some are
Right.
not meant to be word books. I think
Yeah.
they're fully separate things in a way that's really interesting.
That's a great answer and really generous answer. Deanna has given us a little gloss in the chat here of graphic
Mm,
medicine, the intersection between the medium of comics and the discourse of healthcare. So actually, you know what?
interesting.
Maybe you're actually a practitioner of this already in terms
Yeah,
of
but right up my alley. I'll look into it.
it is right up your alley. You've been so generous with your time. I thought I'd end with a question like this. Oh, I think we just saw one coming in. Oh, no, it's not a question. But I thought I'd end on this question here. Near the end of the book, you describe an experience you had with your friend Casey from Australia, not
Mm,
the other Casey. Sorry, other Casey. We should probably find a denominator for the Casey so it's not other Casey. Uh,
ah,
who who described or their experience, I should say, while flying back from a visit to Australia.
mm,
Their description prompted them to wonder this description that Casey offers described on that trip prompted you to wonder whether writing can be transformational. Um,
mm.
this is maybe an unfairly capacious question, but was the writing of this book for you a transformational experience now that you're on the other side and you're taking it on the road?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was honestly less the writing and more the editing. Because as I noted, it took such a long time to edit and to work through it. And it was really interesting in because my symptoms and my life has changed so much since I wrote this book. And so the process of now being able to go back and revisit this period of my life that feels like this is such a different person, and doing that while I was still going through my pain improving, whatever. Yeah, it all felt really transformational for sure. I think it encouraged a lot of reflection and sort of looking inwards that I would not have done otherwise, even as someone who's like in therapy and is like doing the work. There's nothing that makes you think about your life more than writing a book about it.
Right.
Um, so yeah, I think it definitely changed my outlook. Absolutely.
Amazing. In the chat, I have put a link for everybody who's in the London area to support local bookstores, and Little Wren Books has copies of Gabrielle's new book, Look Ma, No Hands. Everyone else all around the country should order the book. And I'm going to read something here from a comment that just came in because I love this. Catherine Blaze says, just wanted to let you know that I pre-ordered the book when I came across this webinar back in March. So thank you both for tonight and for getting me to purchase. I sped through the book in a single day and literally laughed out loud at multiple points, sending out good vibes and much appreciation. So,
That is
wow.
so sweet. Thank you so much. Um,
And a side note, I moved to Quebec in 2007, 9 years ago, and at 9 years ago, and still don't have a family doctor. Oh my
oh
goodness. Oh,
no.
that 9 years of wait. Well, that hopefully yours is not a 9 year wait, but
Hopefully.
there's commiseration here in the chat
Fingers
for you.
crossed.
Yeah.
Um, do we have 3 minutes left? I'm gonna turn off my camera and come back with a surprise in like
Okay.
a second. Okay.
Love it. Love it. Oh, the suspense now of the final surprise. I think I have a little bit of a feeling of what it could be. Um, this is a great opportunity to let everybody know that everybody asks if we're gonna have a video of the conversation. All of our events, we produce videos for them, and I put in the chat a link to our YouTube page, and you should go and subscribe to our YouTube page, and we will eventually put this conversation up as well as all of the webinars that we're doing. Oh, here we go. Oh my goodness.
Look at her. That's a
Wow.
perfect creature.
Pinky.
Hey, G. Did
I
you
was
not? You're
hoping
on
you would speak
camera.
Pidgey.
Oh
Deanna
my
literally said
goodness.
that she hoped that there would be an appearance by
Oh, and there she is. She's gonna leave soon, I think. But
Yay.
there she is, the baby. There she
Oh,
Oh,
goes.
wow. Look at
Oh,
that.
she's on my pull-up bar. She's working on her fitness.
She's working on her fitness.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, it's great too that Deanna came back, so I can thank Deanna for everything that you did to make tonight's event possible. And
Yeah, thank you both so much.
thank you, Gabrielle. This is such an achievement. As I say, this is a homecoming for you to come and talk to us in London, the third visit at Words, but on the third visit, coming back with your debut memoir of your experience. And it's
Full
moving, it's
circle.
funny. I recommend everyone. And as I say too, if anybody has medical professionals in their lives, or anyone else, but medical professionals who are on the front lines of dealing with chronic pain and people with disability, I think Gabrielle's book will give an insight for them into the inner life and the world of people who are experiencing similar situations. Any final thoughts from either of you?
Thank you for having me. What a beautiful moment to, yeah, to have done this 3 times at such different points in my career. It feels really awesome.
Amazing.
And
thank you,
thank you to everyone who
Gabrielle.
came. That's so cool.
Yes,
Sorry,
everybody and
Diana.
still with us. Deanna.
No, just wanted to say thank you. It's lovely to host you. So glad this all came together.
Amazing. So
Oh,
good.
awesome.
Thank you, everybody. I'm going to put up the
Bye, Pidgey.
graphic here so that anybody who wanted to leave a remark can. Let me just grab here the graphic on the screen. And I wanted to say a final thank you to Gabrielle as we go out here. This has been a really wonderful event, and I wish you all the luck in the world for
Thank you so
the
much.
tour that's coming up. And thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. Stay tuned for more events and make sure you go out and get a copy of Gabrielle's book.
Thanks all. Thank you so
Thank you very much
much.
tonight.
Bye.
We'll see you at the next event.
See you at the next one.